Welcome back to the CNBC TV 18 special. My guest is Arshad Zakaria, the co-founder of New One on Capital. Well, within India, what kind of sectors or themes would interest you? Since you're now looking at probably a resurgent India. Right. The old favorites or the first decade Indian favorites were the IT companies. Right. Now, do you think they will continue to dominate mind space, or would it be something else?
I think IT should continue to do well because they are tied into global growth.
Yes.
I think some of the other Indian stories like financial services should continue to be an attractive place, especially if my thesis on cost of capital coming down. And so beneficiaries of cost of capital coming down are financial services, some of the consumer discretionaries or even autos or sectors like that, which could have 5 or 10-year secular runs. I think in other asset classes, real estate, and I know the government is focused on getting REITs and doing more liberalization there. That, again, is a very long duration asset class, which is a beneficiary of lower rates. So I think asset classes, even the fixed income market, if you are successful on inflation, it becomes a very attractive place to be from that perspective. I think when you're looking overall at India over the next few years, you want to make a 5 or 7 year bet that if this team works, you get secular growth. And I think some of the beneficiaries from the cost of capital coming down would be interesting spaces to be in.
At this point in time, if you have to make that slightly longer term bet, say a decadal bet on India, what would your sense be? Does it look like it will just get back to maybe 6%, 6.5%? Or does it look like this political combination can work better?
Right. My view would be initially you get back to 6.5% growth. I think if they continue doing reforms which enhance infrastructure, you can actually move to the next side. Because I think the Chinese growth story, which is the growth story of our generation, where they did double-digit growth forever, infrastructure was an important part of that. So I think India, with financial services and consumer-oriented growth, can get us back to 6 to 7%. If this team can manage to get infrastructure back, I think that's going to have more positive effect on growth than we realize. Because infrastructure creates a huge number of jobs. It's a big beneficiary of the cost of capital coming down. And it actually improves exports a lot because it allows goods to be transported from one place to the other, food to be transported from one place to the other. So I think for India to get back from the 6.5% to 8% growth, you're going to need to see that the infrastructure push succeeds.
Actually, there are various commentaries on the current political regime. Almost everyone agrees that they are not looking or they're not talking about serious game-changing or paradigm-shifting moves. They're not speaking about privatization, and Mr. Modi did not even have a record of privatizing the public sector units in Gujarat. Likewise, the Land Acquisition Act is going to be tweaked, but the compensation will not be touched, and that is a sore point with a lot of India Inc. My point is they're not changing the cost of or the rules that govern land and labor very dramatically. Do you think that would keep back big growth? They seem to be good executives, as you said. He's a good CEO, but he isn't changing paradigms.
I think in that sense, it's too early to tell. I think I'm quite positive about what's been done so far, because I do think you need to get stuff. Execution is the first step. Over the next 5 years, I'm hopeful, and even if it comes in the second part of that 5-year tenure, I think it's okay, because you first want to make sure that everything that's stuck moves more smoothly and the process works better. So I think we got to give him time. I'm optimistic that it will happen. And I do think that cost of capital coming down, if the central bank is successful in that, is another huge push for private infrastructure. Because the one thing to remember is there are not a lot of other places in the world right now. So India may be surprised at foreign capital coming into this, especially if he's successful in another one of things that he's trying to do. And that is, I read or heard somewhere that they want to take India from 142 on the World Bank Ease of Doing Business list to 50. That's a huge benefit because even though India needs a lot of capital, relative to the world's capital, it's a very small amount. So if you can actually do that, it doesn't seem like a big idea, but the effect of it will actually be very significant, because improving governance, improving ease of doing business can really bring foreign capital in, and that will make it a little bit easier to satisfy the infrastructure needs.
Okay. Well, the other niggling worry now is a potential conflict between the central bank and the government. The government appears to be delivering on fiscal deficit, and as a quid pro quo, it will ask for some stimulus from the governor. The governor has declared war on inflation, and we are now at what, 7, and the last number was still 7.2, and it's a long way to 6. Do you think if he gave in or was forced to give in, we might lose the war on inflation? How would you rather this battle of wits, if it happens, play out?
At this point, I think he has enough credibility that people will give the central bank the benefit of the doubt. And I think they're going to look at it, because I think the central bank here seems to have made it clear that they think they want to look longer term. So I think what we don't want is changes in views every 6 months. But I think if you get the government continuing to deliver on the supply side and the central bank focused on that, I think at the right time you should see rates come down and the cost of capital come down, and that's a big plus. So I think in some sense, in this, whatever the central bank does, as long as it seems thought out and with a long-term view, it should be, people should react decently to that.
Okay. All right. Now let me come more, more minutely to sectors that you like. What would be, say, the top 2 or 3 sectors that you would like to invest in?
I think financial services has what I'd like is 5 or 10-year sectors, so you don't have to worry about. And where you look at just where India is in terms of mortgages and overall financial sector growth, especially if financial sector reform comes in, that's a nice 5 or 10-year sector to invest in. Some of the consumer discretionaries, and that's
What's your understanding of financial sector reforms? Does it mean some big reform of public sector banks? At the moment, when you say financial services, there are 3 big categories, at least: private banks, public banks, and the non-bank finance sector.
What I was referring to was actually more deepening of the debt markets, basically bringing down cost of capital. Public sector bank reform would be a big plus. It's a more complicated issue, so I was not really focused on that. But if you could improve the depth of fixed income market, that's a huge opportunity for India. Because if you look at the fixed income market in other places like the United States, the depth of those markets is very significant. And if that can be done out here, and that's something I think the central bank says they're focused on, that's a big plus for 5 or 10 years. Again, I think the theme simply is, you've got a great story and cost of capital is high. If we can find ways to bring cost of capital down, a lot of sectors will benefit from that. That's why I said financial services. I said some of the consumer discretionaries like autos. And I do think on a long-term sector, some exporters, which is, some of these IT companies have had fantastic runs, but they continue to remain cheap. They should do well. Because the important second part of this whole analysis is a stable currency. And that, I think, is something that, again, we've seen for the last year or two, because currency in free fall doesn't help anybody. Even though it has made the exports competitive, I think a stable currency is a good thing.
Oh, yes. At the moment, I think the governor's problem is a currency that's appreciated with the dollar. He would rather not want that. You said you look at long-term stories. And the big long-term story in front of us is this whole digital and online marketing. After Alibaba, we're all focused on that. And there are various deals in the private place. Is this going to be a matter of interest for you as well? And would you play any listed stocks like logistics? There are not too many players.
Very interesting question. I was actually going to come to that, as I said, in a different place. I think there is a big play in the digital space in India, but one has to be very careful. And in the digital space, as you know, it's mainly a winner-take-all kind of market, so you have to identify the winners. But the statistics are simple. If you look at where China was, how some of these companies have grown, with the caveat that some of these Chinese companies, they had the ability to basically build their own companies because it's not a common language. India, some of the
competition.
Some of the competition is going to be fiercer from the global players. But I still think if you look over 5 or 10 years, finding winners in that space is going to be interesting. And then you basically are looking at some of the spin-outs from that, and I think that those will be interesting places to be over 5 or 10 years. The one hesitation in that space is globally, that space is, I don't know if it's in a bubble, but valuations are very high. So you have to make sure that you get great growth, but you have to be able to get a valuation that makes sense in that space.
Well, we're just after Diwali and we will be getting into Christmas season. Leave our investors with some Diwali picks. I mean, which would be the top sector that you would think of, or top 2 sectors that may be your next investment target?
Right. As I said, the sector, we like the financial services sector from that perspective to look at broadly, again, over 5 or 10 year view. And I think if you look at one of the export sectors, because which effectively benefits from global growth, I think those would be 2 sectors to look at.
Arshad Zakaria, it was a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks so much, Latha.